The sign read property for sale, $15 as is. Most people drove past. Marine Jack Mercer stopped. With his 10-year-old daughter and their German shepherd, he bought the wrecked house and found something inside no one expected: his late wife's name on the blueprint. She had drawn the place years before for a life they'd never lived. What followed was 30 days of storms, sweat, and salvation. Watch till the end to hear the words that broke the silence. We're home. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe broken things can still be rebuilt. The highway narrowed into a 2-lane road lined with faded billboards and winter cornfields. Jack Mercer slowed the pickup as the sign for Maple Hollow appeared, white letters on green metal tilted a little like it was tired of being read. His daughter Lily sat beside him, her backpack clutched tight. Ranger, their German shepherd, rested his head on her knee. "So this is home?" she asked. "It will be," Jack said. The property sat at the edge of town, past the feed store and the volunteer firehouse, a half-finished house framed against an open sky. No roof yet, only blue tarp flapping. Weeds pressed against the concrete slab. The seller, an old man in work boots, met them by his car. "It's rough," he said, handing Jack a clipboard. "But the bones are good. Paperwork's all there." "As is." Jack nodded. It was the only place near the base he could afford. He signed, and the man drove away without another word. They stood in silence. Wind threaded through the exposed studs, humming low. Lily looked uncertain. "Where's the kitchen?" she asked. Jack pointed to a far corner. "Right there. You'll help me build it." She managed a small smile. Ranger padded inside, sniffing the ground tail low but steady. They unloaded their few things: 2 cots, a folding table, a cooler, the old radio that had followed Jack through deployments. The back room was the only part with walls. It smelled of pine and dust, not decay yet, just waiting. "We'll sleep here for now," he said. Lily nodded. Her small fingers brushed a splintered beam, tracing its roughness like a map. As dusk fell, Jack boiled water on the camping stove. Lily strung up a few lanterns. The soft glow pushed the shadows back, turning the half-built space almost gentle. He handed her a mug of cocoa. "Welcome home," he said quietly. She sipped, said nothing, but her shoulders loosened a little. When she slept, Jack walked the perimeter with his flashlight, the habit of a Marine inspecting a perimeter he could finally protect. He checked bolts angles and the line where the frame met foundation. Near the front door, he saw 2 nails crossed into a heart, rusted but still whole. He picked them up, remembering a night long ago in Afghanistan when he'd made the same shape out of wire for Grace, his wife. She had laughed and said it was better than gold. He closed his hand around the nails. "You'd like this place," he murmured. The light trembled as wind lifted the tarp. Dad Lily's voice came softly from the doorway. "Come see this." She knelt near a stud bay where a small piece of paper had been wedged behind a nail. "Can I pull it out?" she asked. "Careful," he said. She eased it free. The paper was brittle, stained with time. Across one corner in faint pencil was a short line of handwriting. "If you build it, someone will stay." Jack froze. The tilt of the letters, the slight pressure at the start. It was Grace's hand. He reached into his duffel and pulled out a small notebook wrapped in tape, one of Grace's old sketchbooks. On a page filled with notes for a dream house she'd once wanted, he found the same looping Y, the same uneven spacing. His chest tightened. Lily watched him. "Did Mom write it?" she whispered. "Yeah," he said softly. "Looks like she did." The air seemed to thicken, full of the things they hadn't said since she died. "Was this her house?" Lily asked. Jack looked around the open beams, the promise of rooms not yet drawn. "Maybe it was meant to be," he said. Ranger pressed closer to Lily, tail sweeping the floor once as if agreeing. They tacked the paper to the inside of a stud where sunlight would hit it in the morning. "It should stay here," Lily said. Jack nodded. "Then it will." Later, when the lanterns dimmed, he lay awake on the cot. Through the frame, he could see the stars clean sharp and too many. He thought about the words again. "If you build it, someone will stay." Maybe Grace had drawn this place as part of a charity project years ago. Maybe coincidence had led him here. But tonight, for the first time in months, coincidence felt like mercy. Ranger shifted at his feet. Lily breathed evenly the way children do when they finally believe they're safe. Jack reached out and rested his palm on the cool plywood floor. It vibrated faintly with the night wind, the hum of distant highway, and his own heartbeat mixed in. "We'll build it, Grace," he whispered. "We'll stay." The next morning broke clean and dry, a pale sun rising over the roofs of Maple Hollow, and washing the half-built house in the kind of light that makes even dust look hopeful. Jack woke early, brewed instant coffee on the camp stove, and listened to the faint whistle of a train far outside town. Lily was still asleep, tangled in her blanket, Ranger curled like a sentry beside her. The air smelled of lumber and earth. He stepped outside, stretching his back, then took up a shovel. The house needed plumbing before anything else, and he'd promised himself to dig the Greywater Trench by hand. The ground was stubborn clay mixed with rock, and every strike of the shovel rang like metal on memory. By mid-morning, sweat had soaked through his shirt. He paused to wipe his face and noticed something glinting just beyond the trench line. 2 short nails lay crossed in the dirt, bent at their tips, rust clinging to the seam where they met in a rough heart. He picked them up carefully. The shape was awkward but familiar, the same way he had twisted wire in the desert years ago to make a ring when nothing else was possible. Grace had worn that bit of wire around her neck for months, saying it was her favorite because it was made from something that survived. Now here it was again, same angle, same stubborn bend. He turned the nails in his hand until the light caught their edges, then slipped them into his pocket. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of Lily humming inside. At noon, he packed away the tools and drove into town. The Maple Hollow Municipal Office sat across from the diner and post office, a red brick building with a flag that cracked gently in the breeze. Inside it smelled of paper, ink, and old heating ducts. The clerk at the records counter was a woman about his age with glasses and a name tag that read June. He explained that he'd just bought the unfinished house on Willow Lane and needed to check the permit status before resubmitting the plans. She nodded, tapping keys on an aging computer. "That development's been sitting empty a while," she said. "Started as a community build back in the early 2000s. A few designs were donated by volunteers." She printed a file and handed it across the counter. The paper was thin, the ink slightly blurred from age. Jack flipped through sheets of blueprints, stamped and initialed until one corner stopped him cold. In the lower right box, under a column of technical data, there were words in small handwriting. "Concept Assist G. Mercer." He stared until the room felt smaller. June tilted her head. "You know the designer?" He swallowed. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She was my wife." June blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Well," she said gently, "then I guess this house found its way home." She smiled the kind of smile that made silence softer, then went back to her files. Jack stepped outside with the papers pressed to his chest. The afternoon light slanted over the sidewalk, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from somewhere nearby. He sat in the truck for a long moment, unfolding the sheet and tracing his fingers along the edges. Grace had always drawn with small flourishes, little notches on her measurements, as if she were leaving breadcrumbs for herself to follow later. On this page, near the kitchen outline, she'd drawn a half-circle mark beside the window and written, "Swing View." He remembered her saying once, "I want a kitchen where I can see her swing from the sink." He hadn't known she'd put it on paper. He closed his eyes and saw her handwriting again on the scrap Lily had found last night. "If you build it, someone will stay." The two belonged to each other just like the bent nails in his pocket. Back at the site, Lily sat cross-legged in the dirt, sketching Ranger, who had claimed a spot under the half-framed porch. She looked up when the truck pulled in. "You went to town?" she asked. "Had to check something he said. Guess what I found?" He spread the blueprints across the folding table. Her eyes widened when she saw her mother's name. "Mom drew this," she helped Jack said. "She worked on houses for families who needed a start." Lily traced a line with her finger. "So this was her design." "One of them," he said. "But maybe this one waited for us." That night, they ate sandwiches on the plywood floor while Ranger gnawed at his chew toy. Jack explained how the plumbing lines would run, showing Lily how to read the plan's faint markings. She listened like someone learning a secret language. When she pointed to the half-circle marked swing view, her voice went small. "She wanted to see me from here." Jack nodded. She did. Lily didn't speak for a while after that. The lantern light caught the side of her face, the same quiet profile Grace used to have when she was thinking. Later, after Lily slept, Jack sat outside on the step that wasn't yet a porch and looked out across the dark fields. Fireflies blinked near the tree line. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the bent nails, and set them beside him on the wood. They caught the light like tiny hearts beating slow. He realized that every piece of this house, every mark, every note, was a message he hadn't been ready to read until now. Grace had built the blueprint, and now he was finishing her sentence. Inside, the radio murmured softly, a country station half fading in and out. Ranger came to sit beside him, head resting against Jack's knee. Jack looked at the horizon where the last streak of daylight held on. "We'll finish it, Grace," he said under his breath. "We'll make it right this time." The dog's ear twitched, catching the tone even if not the words. Somewhere behind them, the wind brushed against the exposed beams, whispering through the gaps like a sigh learning to become music. 2 days later, sunlight filtered through a line of half-framed windows, cutting bright squares across the floor. Jack worked at the sawhorse table, blueprints pinned down with an old wrench. He was marking plumbing runs when a gray sedan pulled up. A man stepped out wearing a short-sleeved dress shirt and a tie too tight for the day's heat. "Jack Mercer," he called. "Town inspection." Jack wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded. "You must be Mr. Coleman." The man offered a polite half-smile, clipboard already in hand. Ranger barked once from the porch-frame tail, low, cautious, but not aggressive. Lily stood by the doorframe, watching. Coleman walked the property with practiced steps, eyes measuring every nail. "You've done good work keeping it clean," he said. "But according to our records, this site's permit expired about 7 years ago." Jack's stomach tightened. "The foundation was already poured when I bought it," he said. "I plan to reapply once we stabilized the frame." Coleman made a small note. "Problem is, without an active permit, it's technically an unapproved structure. If the council reviews and finds it unsafe, they can tag it for demolition. It's a process not immediate, but you'll want to address it soon." The word demolition landed heavy, even though Coleman said it gently. Jack nodded, calm on the surface. "I'll file as soon as possible." Coleman looked up from his clipboard. "That's good. I don't enjoy marking down folks who are trying. You'll find the new forms at the municipal office." He handed Jack a pamphlet, tipped his hat slightly, and left with a dust swirl from his tires. Lily had been standing by the window the whole time. She couldn't hear every word, but she heard enough. Demolition sounded too much like eviction, and in her 10-year-old heart, both meant losing home again. That night, she barely touched her dinner. Jack, assuming she was tired, told her they'd start setting the interior walls the next day. He didn't notice her slip out after he fell asleep. The moon hung low over Maple Hollow, silvering the unfinished beams. Lily crept across the cold floorboards carrying a small hammer, a handful of nails, and 2 short planks she'd found in the tool pile. Ranger lifted his head from the corner and watched her. "Go back to sleep," she whispered. He didn't move. She dragged the planks outside to the yard where the front wall should have stood. Her breath came in small clouds. "If I build it," she murmured, repeating the phrase she'd memorized from her mother's handwriting. "Someone will stay." She propped the first board upright, braced it with a loose stone, and started to hammer. The sound was small but sharp in the night air, each strike echoing against the hollow ground. Ranger whined softly, circling her, then lay down beside the tool bucket as if to guard her. She worked for almost an hour. The boards wobbled, the nails crooked, but to her it looked like progress. She whispered to her mother as she worked, telling her about school, about the neighbor's cat that always hid under their truck, about how Dad still kept her old scarf in the glove compartment. When she finally stopped, she stood back to look. The wall leaned one board at an angle, but she smiled. "It's your wall, Mom," she said quietly. Ranger thumped his tail once in the dirt. Just before dawn, Jack woke to the sound of distant tapping. At first he thought it was the wind tugging at loose siding, but the rhythm was too even. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind that smells of wet soil and morning dew. He followed the sound and stopped when he saw his daughter standing barefoot in the yard, hammer raised. The boards gleamed pale under the moon. "Lily," he said, voice low. She startled, almost dropping the hammer. "Dad, I was just—" Her words tangled. "Mr. Coleman said they'll take it down," she blurted out. "I didn't want them to. I thought if I finished it we could stay." Jack felt something inside him tighten, the kind of ache that sits behind the ribs. He crouched down, hands on his knees. "Hey," he said softly. "No one's taking it. We just need permission to keep building. That's all." Her eyes filled fast. "You promise?" "I promise," he said. "But you can't build at night by yourself. It's not safe." She nodded, lip trembling. "I wanted it to be Mom's wall." Jack looked at the crooked boards and saw not a mistake but devotion made visible. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll make it hers," he said. "Together." He carried her inside, tucked her under the blanket. When she fell asleep, Ranger climbed up beside the cot, resting his muzzle near her hand. Jack went back out, looked at the boards, catching the first blush of sunrise. He didn't move them. He left them standing exactly as she'd built them, nails crooked and proud. It reminded him that hope never learned symmetry. Later that morning, he called the municipal office. June answered, cheerful as always. "Morning, Mr. Mercer. I need to file a new permit application," he said. "Today, if possible." "Come on by," she said. "I'll help you start it." He glanced at the half-wall outside Ranger, sniffing around it, tail wagging slow. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It's time we make it official." That night, he framed Lily's sketch of her wall beside Grace's torn note. 2 messages, same house. He stood in the doorway long after she'd fallen asleep. Ranger at his feet, and thought how a child's fear could sometimes teach a grown man what love was meant to look like. The wind came early that afternoon, low and steady at first, the kind that makes the grass bow and the tarps whisper against their nails. Jack had been nailing the interior studs while Lily painted the small plywood boards she called Mom's wall. Ranger trotted between them, nose to the airtail, uneasy. The sky over Maple Hollow had that gray-green color that means something's coming. Storm Lily asked, squinting toward the west. Jack checked his phone radar, red bands sweeping their way. "Could just be rain," he said, though he knew better. He started securing loose materials while Lily stacked her paints inside the back room. The temperature dropped so fast it made his arms prickle. Ranger barked once sharp, then turned circles near the door, his instincts working faster than any app. By the time the first thunder rolled, the wind had found its voice. It howled through the unfinished frame, rattling every nail. Jack yelled for Lily to stay inside. He ran to tighten the rope holding the tarp over the front frame, but the gusts tore it loose. The plastic whipped like a live thing, snapping hard enough to sting his cheek. Rain followed thick, slanted, and cold. He ducked into the skeleton of the house, reaching for the tool bucket when the sound changed. A deep groan from above wood grinding against metal. He turned in time to see the front frame shudder. "Lily," he shouted. She had stepped out just 2 strides from the doorway, clutching one of her painted boards. Ranger saw it first. The dog bolted forward as the beam cracked. Jack lunged too far away, helpless in that single instant when time pulls apart. Ranger slammed into Lily, knocking her clear as the beam came down with a crash that shook the slab. Dust and rain mixed into mud, and for a second everything went silent except the hiss of water on splintered wood. Jack reached them, heart-hammering. Lily was coughing, but unhurt mud streaking her hair. Ranger lay beside her front paw, bent wrong, whimpering low. "Easy, buddy Jack," whispered his voice, trembling. He checked the dog's leg. It was bleeding, but not broken through. He lifted Ranger in his arms, feeling the weight press against his chest, heavy but alive. Lily followed close, tears mixing with rain. They drove to the Maple Hollow Veterinary Clinic wipers, fighting the downpour. The sign outside flickered in the wind. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic and hay. The vet, a calm woman named Dr. Avery, led them to a small exam room. "He's lucky," she said after checking the leg. "Just a deep gash and muscle strain. We'll clean it and splint it. He'll limp for a while." Lily sat on the metal chair, silent eyes fixed on the bandage wrapping around Ranger's leg. The dog didn't whine, just watched her with patient eyes. Jack stepped into the hallway to call the lumberyard. His mind ran in 2 directions, the guilt for not catching the frame sooner and the need to fix the damage before the next rain. The foreman on the other end asked how bad it was. "Front frame's down," Jack said. "We'll need replacement beams. We lost 2 days of work, maybe more." He heard the words leave his mouth flat and automatic, the way soldiers talk about time and loss like math. He turned back toward the room just as Lily's face changed. She had heard him, eyes wide, mouth tightening. "You lost 2 days of work," she whispered. "Ranger could have died." Her voice cracked on the last word. Jack froze, realizing too late how it sounded. "Honey, that's not what I meant." But she was already crying, turning away from him. "You care more about the house," she said, small but sharp, and it cut deeper than any nail. The vet came in quietly, sensing the tension. "He'll need rest and no running for 2 weeks, she said, handing Jack the discharge paper. Lily refused to look at him. Jack paid the bill, his signature barely legible. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, the town washed clean, but the air heavy. On the drive home, Lily sat pressed against the window ranger's head on her lap. Jack tried once, twice to speak, then stopped. The windshield wipers squeaked, counting seconds. When they reached the house, the front frame lay collapsed like a fallen soldier, nails sticking out like small accusations. The painted board Lily had dropped earlier lay half buried in mud, the color smeared into something unreadable. Jack got out, lifted it gently, and leaned it against the wall. He wanted to tell her they'd fix it, that the house could be rebuilt, but the words stayed behind his teeth. That night, Lily refused dinner. She slept beside Ranger, her hand resting lightly on his bandaged paw. Jack sat on the steps with his head in his hands, the storm still echoing inside him. He had meant the words about work as a measure of time, not care. But to his daughter, time and love were the same thing. The more he worked, the further she must have felt him drift. In the dim light, he looked at the bent nails from his pocket, still shaped like a heart. He pressed them together in his palm and whispered, "I didn't forget." The night air carried the faint smell of wet earth and the sharp tang of cedar. Somewhere beyond the fields, thunder grumbled again, softer now, like an old man clearing his throat. Jack closed his eyes and made himself a promise that the next thing he built wouldn't just be walls. It would be trust. The storm had passed, but its weight lingered. 2 mornings later, Maple Hollow was washed clean and quiet. The sky was a blank, forgiving blue, the kind that hides no anger. Jack stood by the fallen frame, hammer in hand, not to work, but to think. The boards lay twisted, streaked with mud. Every strike of rain had left its mark, and he could almost read the story of their failure in the grain. Inside, Lily stayed close to Ranger, who now wore a neat white cast that made his stride uneven but dignified. She rarely spoke, answering in nods or small hums. Jack didn't push. He knew some wounds needed silence before words. That afternoon, he set about cleaning the utility corner where the storm had thrown tools and boxes into chaos. The old metal toolbox he'd inherited from Grace's father sat half open, caked in sawdust. When he lifted it, something shifted inside a soft scrape that didn't sound like metal. He brushed off the lid, noticed a seam along the bottom that wasn't factory-made. Curious, he pried at it with a screwdriver until a thin panel came loose. Behind it, folded and yellowed, was a letter. His name was written on the front in Grace's looping script. He sat down on the workbench before opening it, his breath uneven. The paper smelled faintly of oil and lavender, the same scent she used to keep in the kitchen drawer. The letter was short, only a few lines written in the same calm voice that used to settle him when nothing else could. Jack, it began. If you ever build again, let her help you. Don't shut her out of what you're trying to hold together. Let her help you build something you both can stay in. He read it twice, then a third time until the words blurred. She had written it knowing how he worked, how he built walls when scared, not just from wood. He'd done it again, chasing order instead of connection. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Outside, the light shifted slow and golden. He found Lily sitting on the porch step, her legs pulled close, Ranger at her side. The dog's ears perked when Jack came near, but Lily didn't look up. Jack crouched beside her, unsure how to start. He's healing fast, he said gently. She ran a finger along the cast. The vet said he's brave, she murmured. Jack nodded. He is. He hesitated, then added, So are you. She didn't reply, but her shoulders softened just a little. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack sat at the table under the single bulb. The house creaked around him, its emptiness more companion than burden. He pulled the letter from his pocket again, reading it aloud in a whisper. Let her help you build something you both can stay in. He thought about the way Lily had looked at him in the vet's office, like a door had closed between them. He had been so focused on finishing the house, measuring progress in boards and beams, that he'd forgotten who he was building for. Ranger limped across the room, nails clicking softly on plywood. The dog stopped near Lily's cot, sniffed once, and lowered himself slowly, his injured leg dragging a little. He circled twice, then settled so that his casted paw rested on the edge of her blanket. Lily stirred, half awake. Ranger, she whispered. He didn't move, only pressed closer, his chin on her sock's tail, thumping once. Jack watched from the doorway, something tightening in his throat. That small, quiet gesture a soldier's dog performing his training without being told said what he couldn't. Lily reached out and touched Ranger's head. Her eyes glistened in the dim light, tears rolling down her cheeks without sound. You stayed, she whispered to him. The dog huffed softly, closing his eyes. Jack turned away, not wanting her to see his own tears forming. He leaned against the wall, staring at the half-finished frame through the window. Grace's letter echoed again in his mind. Maybe building wasn't about structure, but about presence being steady enough for someone else to stay. The next morning he cooked oatmeal, the first warm breakfast in weeks. Lily came to the table quietly. Ranger hobbled behind her tail, brushing her legs. Jack placed a bowl in front of her. You think Ranger's ready for light duty? He asked. A small smile flickered across her face. He can hand you the hammer, she said. Jack chuckled softly. Then we'll start small, just enough to stand the frame again. After breakfast, they went outside together. The ground was dry now, the scent of mud giving way to pine and sunlight. Jack pointed to the broken section. "We'll rebuild this, but slower this time," he said. "You can help measure." She looked uncertain, but nodded. Ranger lay in the grass nearby, watching tail thumping with approval. As they worked, Jack could feel something in the air shift. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was movement toward it, the quiet kind that starts before words do. He watched Lily line up the tape measure tongue between her teeth in concentration, so much like her mother used to do. For the first time in days, the house didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a beginning. That evening, when the sun sank low, Jack tacked Grace's letter to the inside of the new frame where it would be sealed later by drywall. It wasn't for luck or memory. It was a promise to build something they could both stay in, just like she'd asked. The air in Maple Hollow warmed by late March, bringing the smell of wet soil and sawdust back into the unfinished house. Jack had rebuilt most of the fallen frame by then. It stood taller now, straighter, with Lily helping to hold the level while Ranger watched from his patch of sun near the door. Still, something nagged at Jack, a feeling that there was more of Grace, hidden somewhere in the bones of this house, a trace he hadn't yet uncovered. One morning after dropping Lily at school, he drove back into town to find out. The town records office looked the same as the day he first stepped in its linoleum floor, polished to a dull shine, the air humming with fluorescent light. June, the clerk, with gentle eyes, looked up from her desk. "Back again, Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "I'm hoping to find the full blueprint set for that house on Willow Lane," he said. "The one my wife worked on years ago." She smiled softly, nodding. "You mentioned her before, Grace Mercer, right? I think I remember seeing that file in the archives. It's old, might take a bit." She led him into a back room filled with gray filing cabinets that smelled faintly of dust and time. The drawers groaned as she pulled them open, flipping through folders until she stopped at one labeled Community Homes Project 2004. "Here," she said, handing it to him. Jack carried it to the nearest table and opened it carefully. Inside were half a dozen folded sheets, the blue faded almost white. His fingers traced the familiar handwriting in the margins, Grace's tidy notes scattered like quiet thoughts. Near the kitchen outline, a line read, "Sink, window, swing view." He froze. He remembered her saying years ago in their small apartment that she wanted a kitchen where she could watch Lily swing while washing dishes. Back then he'd laughed, promising her that one day she would. Now, staring at that note in the town archive, he realized she had drawn that promise into paper long before either of them had seen this land. He spent another hour reading every inch of the plans, each corner revealing something of her. Add light. Keep simple. Build safe. 3 words she had written in pencil along the beam lines. A faint brown ring stained one edge of the page, just large enough to be the mark of her coffee mug. He smiled, remembering how she always balanced a cup on the edge of whatever she was drawing, claiming that creativity needed caffeine. It made him feel as though she were sitting across from him now, explaining each curve, each choice. When he drove home, the blueprints lay on the passenger seat, secured with his jacket. The sun was high, glinting off the windshield, and for the first time in weeks he didn't feel the weight of loss pressing behind his ribs. Instead, he felt guided, as if Grace had already set the path and all he needed to do was follow it. Lily was in the yard when he arrived, tossing a stick for Ranger, who hobbled after it with clumsy determination. "Hey, Dad," she called, her laughter light for the first time since the storm. Jack smiled and lifted the roll of paper. "Got something to show you." They spread the blueprints on the kitchen table, a folding slab of plywood balanced on sawhorses, and pinned the corners down with nails. Lily leaned in close, studying the lines. "This is our house," she whispered. "Yeah," Jack said quietly. "And your mom drew it." Her eyes widened as she spotted the faint ring near the edge. "Is that?" He nodded. "Her coffee stain. Same mug she used every morning?" Lily touched it carefully, tracing the outline with her fingertip. "Mom already drew where we eat," she said softly. Jack's throat tightened. "She did," he replied. They stood together in silence for a moment, both of them staring at the paper as though it could breathe. The faint smell of sawdust drifted in through the open window. Outside, the afternoon light shifted warm and forgiving, glinting off the nails of the rebuilt frame. Lily looked up. "Do you think she wanted us to finish it?" Jack nodded slowly. "I think she knew we would." That evening, Lily taped the blueprint to the plywood wall beside Grace's letter. The two pieces of paper fluttered gently in the breeze from the open door, their edges brushing as though whispering to each other. Jack cooked dinner soup and toasted bread, while Lily sat nearby, drawing her own little version of the house, adding flowers and a tree swing. Ranger rested at her feet, the cast on his leg, now smaller, almost gone. After they ate, Jack took the old heart-shaped nails from his pocket and set them beside the blueprint. "These were hers, too," he said. "Found them the day we started digging." Lily smiled. "Then everything here started with her." Jack looked at the walls, at the way the lantern light touched them, and realized Lily was right. This wasn't just a rebuild, it was a continuation. Grace had laid the foundation in lines of graphite. They were simply finishing the story. Before bed, Jack stepped outside. The town was quiet, except for a single barking dog far off and the wind moving through the fields. He could see their house glowing softly through the window, Lily's small shadow pacing by the wall, Ranger following close. The frame stood strong now, waiting for walls and roof and life. Jack looked up at the stars and said what he hadn't been able to say since the funeral. "Thank you, Grace. We're still building." The letter from the town arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded in a plain white envelope with the seal of Maple Hollow printed across the top. Jack found it tucked between a stack of lumber invoices and Lily's school papers. The wording was polite, official, and merciless. The council had reviewed the property, acknowledging his progress, but because the permit had lapsed beyond a grace period, the town required substantial completion within 30 days. Otherwise, the land would revert to auction. 30 days. The number pulsed in his mind like a clock ticking just behind his ear. He read it twice, then set it down, his hand still. Lily was at school, and Ranger lay near the door asleep in a beam of light, his leg nearly healed. Jack leaned back against the workbench and looked at the half-built structure around him, the bare rafters, the plywood seams, the promise still suspended in midair. He had come so far since that first night, since finding Grace's words and the blueprint she'd drawn, but now the town had turned hope into a countdown. That afternoon he drove to the base. The air smelled of jet fuel and sun-baked asphalt, the sounds of drills and shouted cadence echoing across the lot. Captain Harris was in his office reading over training schedules. The man had a calm presence, steady eyes, clipped sentences, the kind of leader who believed discipline was just another form of care. "Come in, Mercer," he said without looking up. "Heard you're building something off base." Jack nodded. "Trying to," he said, handing over the letter. Harris read it quickly, then leaned back. 30 days. That's tight. Tighter than I can manage alone, Jack admitted. But it's for my daughter. And for Grace. Harris studied him for a moment. "You know I can't assign troops to personal projects." Jack nodded again. "I'm not asking for that. But if we could classify some of the work as field training, team coordination, load management, maybe a few volunteers could come out off duty. I'd cover supplies." Harris rubbed his jaw, thinking. Outside the window, 2 young Marines were loading gear into a Humvee, joking between commands. "You've always run your team straight," Harris said finally. "You build something that stands not just for you, but for this town. It counts as service in my book." He signed a form, then looked up. "You get your crew. Weekends and off hours. Keep it safe and by regulation. Jack exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Harris said. 30 days goes faster than you think. That Saturday, the first truck pulled into Willow Lane. 6 Marines piled out, young, loud, ready to move anything that weighed more than themselves. They brought tool belts, gloves, and the kind of humor that turns exhaustion into music. Lily watched from the porch steps, eyes wide. They're helping us, she asked. Jack smiled. They're helping themselves too. This is training. The Marines grinned at her like big brothers. Yes, ma'am, one said. Best field classroom in the county. Ranger barked once, as if approving the chain of command. By noon, the yard buzzed with rhythm saws, whining hammers sinking in a rough, perfect cadence. Jack divided the crew, 2 working on roof supports, others fixing the porch frame that had given way in the storm. Lily helped mark measurements, calling out numbers like she'd been born on a construction site. The young men teased her gently, asking if she wanted to join the Corps one day. Maybe she said, eyes bright. If they let me build houses instead of tents. In the evening, the group gathered around the folding table for sandwiches and lemonade. Sweat streaked their faces, but the laughter was easy. One Marine, a tall kid from Oklahoma, looked at the blueprint taped to the wall and asked, "Who drew this?" Jack said. "My wife." The room quieted for a moment, then the kid nodded respectfully. "She's got good lines, sir." Jack smiled. She did. The conversation turned light again, and Lily leaned against her father's arm, resting her head there the way she used to before the world got heavy. When the crew left at dusk, the house looked different. Bones, stronger, lines straighter, a shape that felt like belonging. The air smelled of sawdust and promise. Jack watched the taillights fade down the road and whispered, "We might just make it." Lily grinned. "Told you." Ranger wagged his tail, the sound of it tapping the porch like a heartbeat. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Jack stood in the doorway with the 30-day notice still pinned to the wall. He looked at the date circled in red and didn't feel fear anymore. He felt motion. Grace's notes on the blueprint. Harris's signature on the form. Lily's laughter. It all pointed in one direction forward. He turned off the lantern, the moonlight slipping through the rafters, painting pale squares across the floor. The house, unfinished but alive, seemed to breathe with them. The weekend after the Marines left Maple Hollow woke early to the sound of hammers. Word had spread quickly. Someone said a Marine was rebuilding his wife's house by hand. Another said a little girl was helping him measure every wall. Whatever version people heard, they came. Old trucks rolled up one by one, a retired carpenter with a belt of tools, a widow from down the street bringing sandwiches, 3 high school kids eager to carry lumber. By mid-morning, the yard buzzed again, but this time the rhythm felt different, less like duty, more like devotion. Jack stood on the porch beam, calling out measurements while Lily handed up nails from the bucket. Ranger, still limping but determined, trotted between them with short lengths of twine tied to his collar, delivering what he could. "Good boy, Sergeant Ranger," one of the boys called, laughing. The name stuck instantly. Before noon, everyone was using it, even Jack. "Sergeant Ranger report to supply," he'd say, pointing to the tool pile, and the dog would wag his tail as if he understood the chain of command. The town's veterans arrived next. They came quietly, men who hadn't worn uniforms in decades but still carried themselves like they remembered the weight of them. One brought a circular saw, another a level older than Jack. They didn't ask for instruction. They simply started working side by side, hands steady and deliberate. At noon, when the church bell rang, they all stopped together, leaning on their tools like soldiers catching breath. The air smelled of wood dust, sweat, and fresh-cut pine. Lily watched it all with wide eyes, her hair tied back with an old bandana of Grace's. "Dad," she said softly, "they're fixing Mom's house too." Jack looked at her and smiled. "Ours now," he said. "Hers started it." We'll finish it together." He could see the pride settling in her shoulders, the same quiet pride Grace used to wear when something finally fit square. That afternoon, the walls began to rise again. Each frame lifted into place with a collective count, 1, 2, 3, and each thud of wood meeting anchor sounded like punctuation in a sentence that had waited too long to finish. The veterans hummed old tunes half out of memory, half to keep time. Lily stood beside Ranger, watching the lines straighten, her eyes bright. She held a small notebook, sketching the scene with quick pencil strokes. "We'll hang this drawing in the kitchen," she said. Jack nodded. "And you'll sign it," he told her. Builders sign their work. By sunset, 3 walls stood firm, bathed in orange light. The air had cooled the kind of gentle quiet that only comes after honest labor. Neighbors stayed even after the tools were packed, sitting on overturned buckets, sharing stories, while Jack grilled burgers on a borrowed propane stove. Someone brought sweet tea. Someone else handed Lily a slice of pie. The laughter came easy, the way small towns do when they remember their one heartbeat. Later that night, when everyone left the yard felt wide and calm, fireflies blinked near the edge of the field. Lily sat cross-legged by the porch steps with a thin plank of cedar across her knees. "What's that?" Jack asked. "A sign," she said, dipping her brush in dark paint. She worked slowly, her tongue peeking out the way it did when she concentrated. Ranger sat beside her, chin resting on his good paw eyes, following the brush strokes. When she finished, she leaned back and read aloud the words she'd painted for Mom. "Built by hands that stayed." Jack stared at it, unable to speak for a moment. The letters weren't perfect, one a little crooked, another smudged, but they held something sacred. He crouched beside her. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. "She would love it." Lily smiled faintly. "Can we put it by the door?" "We can," he said. "But let's sign the back first." He handed her his pencil, and together they wrote their names, Jack and Lily Mercer, Maple Hollow, Year 1. She added a small heart beneath the words. Then Ranger's paw print, pressed gently with paint. Jack laughed softly. "He's part of the crew now." Lily nodded seriously. "Sergeant Ranger Construction Division." They mounted the sign on the frame near the doorway, the wood catching the last bit of twilight. For the first time, the house looked less like a project and more like a promise. Jack stood back, arm around Lily's shoulders, and felt the quiet satisfaction that comes when purpose and place finally touch. Before they went inside, one of the veterans, the carpenter with the old saw, returned from his truck, carrying a folded flag. "Found this in my garage," he said. "Used to hang in the VFW hall. Thought maybe it belonged here now." Jack accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. The man nodded. "Houses like this built by staying. It's what we fought for." That night, after Lily and Ranger fell asleep, Jack sat under the bare bulb again, looking at Grace's blueprint taped beside their new sign. The words, "built by hands that stayed," glowed faintly in the lamplight. He thought of every person who had lifted a board that day, every hand that had steadied a nail. This wasn't just about meeting a deadline anymore. It was about belonging to a house, a town, a memory, a promise. Outside, the wind shifted softly through the studs, the structure creaking not in protest, but in rhythm, as if alive. Jack whispered into the dark, "We're almost there, Grace. Almost home." The morning they began the roof, the sky stretched open and blue, the kind of light that makes every nail shine like silver. The air carried the scent of new lumber and spring grass. Jack rose before dawn, making coffee and sandwiches for the volunteers. The 30-day deadline loomed like a shadow behind every sunrise, but the house now had walls, windows framed, and laughter that lingered in the corners. Today would be the most dangerous part, lifting the ridge beam and securing the roof panels before the weekend storm rolled in. By 7, the yard was alive again. The Marines returned, sleeves-rolled faces, sunburned and ready. A few neighbors joined too, the veterans in their flannel shirts working alongside the young men as if time had folded itself back into purpose. Lily stood on the porch steps, holding Ranger's leash loosely. "Stay with me today, okay?" she whispered to him. The dog wagged once, his healed leg barely limping now, the scar hidden under new fur. Jack gathered everyone around the sawhorses where the beam rested. "We'll set the ridge first," he said. "No rush. We go slow and steady. Wind's light now, but out here it can change in minutes." Captain Harris, who'd stopped by to oversee the team, gave a curt nod. "Treat it like a field op. No shortcuts." The men grinned, half serious, half humbled. By mid-morning, the first panel went up creaking against the harness ropes. Jack climbed the ladder hammer hanging from his belt. Sweat ran down his back, stinging his eyes. Below, Lily held the end of a rope, face tilted up toward him. Ranger sat beside her, alert tail motionless. "Almost there, kiddo," Jack called. She smiled, small and proud. The wind arrived without warning, rolling across the plains like a beast waking. It came low, then surged, bending the grass flat. The tarp at the far corner whipped loose and snapped like a flag. One of the Marines shouted, "Hold the beam!" The ridge timber groaned, lifting slightly as if testing its own will. Jack lunged, grabbing the line, his boots sliding an inch across the plywood. "Hold it steady," he called out. Harris and 2 others braced the opposite side shoulders, pressed to wood arms, trembling. Nails rattled in the tin bucket near Lily's feet, a sound like rain before the storm. Ranger barked once, sharp and fast, his instincts sensing danger before anyone else did. He pulled free from Lily's hand, darted forward, and planted himself near the base of the ladder, barking at the beam as if commanding it to stay. The wind tore through again, stronger this time, whistling through the rafters. The beam shifted, one end jerking up. Jack wrapped his arm around it, feeling the strain tear at his shoulder. "Ropes," he shouted. Harris tossed one end, another Marine tied down the base, while Jack hammered each strike, drowned by the wind's scream. For 30 long seconds, everything hung between breaking and holding. Jack's muscles burned, his fingers numb from gripping the slick wood. He thought of Grace, then her quiet voice in that letter, "Build something you both can stay in." The words steadied him. "Don't let go," he yelled. The beam tilted, caught again, and finally settled into its notch with a hard final sound, a sound like exhale after fear. Then silence. The wind died as suddenly as it had come, leaving the field still and humming with relief. The men stepped back, panting. The beam held. The roof against the odds stood straight and proud. Jack stayed on the ladder a moment longer, one hand on the timber feeling its steady weight. Lily ran to the base, her cheeks streaked with dust and worry. "Dad," she called. "It's okay." He smiled down at her voice, hoarse. "We're okay. The roof's staying." She looked up, her small face glowing in the sunlight. "So are we," she whispered. Captain Harris gave a small nod from below. "Nice work, Mercer," he said quietly. "You just built more than a roof." The other men laughed softly, shaking out their arms, the tension fading into pride. Ranger limped over and placed his paw on Jack's boot tail, wagging slow and certain. "Good work," Sergeant Jack murmured, rubbing his head. They finished securing the panels through the afternoon, the sun sliding west behind the maple trees. By dusk, the house looked whole for the first time, no longer a skeleton, but a shelter. Lily brought out her mother's old thermos filled with lemonade, handing cups to each man like a ceremony. The Marines clinked their paper cups together, toasting the day's work. "To roofs that hold," one said. "And hearts that do the same," another added. Jack stood back, his hands raw and splintered, his heart full. He looked at the finished ridgeline cutting across the orange sky and felt something anchored deep inside him. He whispered the words before he even realized he was saying them. "We're staying." The sound was barely more than breath, but it carried through the wood, through the still air, through everything they'd built together. The others fell silent for a moment, not because they heard him, but because somehow the house itself seemed to listen. The last light of day touched the new roof, glinting off the fresh nails, and the whole structure gave a soft creak like acknowledgement, like gratitude. Jack stepped down from the ladder, brushed the dust from his hands, and smiled toward the horizon. The sky above Maple Hollow glowed the color of home. The inspection took place on a cool April morning, the kind of morning that feels like forgiveness after a long winter. The air was clean-edged with the scent of sawdust and spring rain still trapped in the soil. Jack had swept the floors twice before dawn, even though the place was spotless, no drywall yet, but everything in its right place. Lily sat by the kitchen window, tracing circles on the fogged glass, while Ranger stretched lazily at her feet. When the sound of tires crunched on the gravel drive, Jack's stomach tightened. Mr. Coleman stepped out of his car, carrying a clipboard, his familiar white shirt bright under the sunlight. He paused at the porch steps, taking in the new roofline, the painted frames, the porch post where Lily's sign hung proudly for Mom. Built by hands that stayed. He smiled faintly. "You've been busy, Mercer." Jack wiped his palms on his jeans. "We had help," he said. "A lot of it." Coleman walked slowly through the doorway, the wooden boards creaking just enough to sound alive. His eyes followed the lines of the beams, the symmetry of the joins. He stopped near the window and whistled low. "Clean work. Sturdy. I've seen government projects less organized than this." Jack chuckled softly. "That's the Marines for you." Coleman nodded, flipping through his papers. "We've been following your progress. The council met last night. Normally unfinished properties can't be occupied, but considering the volunteer effort and community involvement—" He looked up, eyes kind. "They voted to designate this a community build. You're cleared for temporary occupancy." Jack blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "So, we can stay?" Coleman smiled. "You can stay." Lily had been listening from the kitchen. She jumped up her chair, scraping the floor. "Did he say we can stay?" she shouted. Jack turned toward her, eyes shining. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice catching. "We can stay." She ran across the room and threw her arms around him, nearly knocking over his coffee. Ranger barked twice, circling them in excitement. Coleman laughed quietly. "Seems the place has already got its soul," he said. "Welcome home, Mercer." He signed the bottom of the paper with a firm stroke and handed it to Jack. "Frame this one," he added, before heading for the door. When the sound of his car faded down the road, the house seemed to exhale the kind of silence that follows long-held breath. Jack stood in the center of the room, holding the signed document like it was made of glass. Lily looked around, her eyes wide. "So, this is it," she whispered. "Our first night here." Jack nodded slowly. "Our first real night." That afternoon, neighbors dropped by to celebrate. Mrs. Hill from across the street brought pie, the veterans brought folding chairs, and the Marines, who had helped with the roof, sent a note signed, "From your second crew." By sunset, the yard buzzed with laughter and the soft hum of easy music from a portable radio. Lily passed out paper cups of lemonade, her smile brighter than the lights strung between the porch posts. Ranger sat proudly by the doorway, watching over everyone like he understood his duty wasn't done yet. When the stars came out, the guests drifted home one by one. The laughter faded into the night until only crickets and the quiet murmur of the wind through the rafters remained. Jack and Lily spread out their sleeping bags on the living room floor. The walls still smelled of new pine, the floor smooth beneath their blankets. A lantern burned low in the corner, painting soft gold across the unfinished boards. Lily opened the small wooden box that held Grace's letters. The top one had been read so many times its folds had softened. She held it carefully, her voice steady as she read aloud. A home isn't what you live in. It's what you keep building. She paused, looking at her father. She meant this, didn't she? Jack nodded, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. Yeah, he said quietly. Every word. Ranger stretched near the doorway, his body curled just enough to block it, ears twitching at every sound outside. His breathing was slow, steady, a soldier's rhythm in peacetime. Jack smiled at the sight, something warm rising in his chest. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from Lily's face. You did good, kid, he said softly. She smiled sleepily. We all did. Within minutes, her breathing matched the dog's, even and peaceful. Jack stood, walked to the doorway, and leaned a hand against the frame. The wood was warm from the day's sun, still holding the touch of all those hands that had built it. He looked around the new roof above him, the framed windows, the shadows of his daughter and their dog sleeping safe. The wind outside whispered through the half-finished eaves, soft as memory. He could almost hear Grace's voice in it, the echo of that same quiet strength that had carried him here. He whispered, "We're home." The words seemed to sink into the wood itself, settling there, becoming part of the house. The lantern flickered once the air still, and for the first time in years, Jack felt peace, not as a moment, but as something that could stay. He sat down beside Lily, listening to the night breathe around them. Beyond the window, the maples swayed in the dark, and the sky stretched wide and open above Maple Hollow. Tomorrow there would still be work painting flooring more to build, but tonight they had arrived. The home wasn't finished, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Before you go, tell me what you think. Would you have stayed and rebuilt that house or walked away? What moment hit you the hardest, the storm, the letter, or the night? He whispered, "We're home." I'd love to hear where you're watching from, so drop your town or city in the comments. If this story moved you, give it a like. Hit subscribe and share it with someone who still believes that some homes are built from love, not luck.